Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had to wear a cursed item to access One for All. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop was a liar. It carried the scents of the city below, takoyaki from a street vendor, the metallic tang of the train lines, the sweet perfume of cherry blossoms from a distant park, and wove them into a promise of life, of a world teeming with energy and purpose. But up here, on the graveled surface of this nondescript building, the wind felt like a vulture, circling a dream that had just been slain. Izuku Midoriya stood with his hands clenched on the cold metal of the safety railing, his knuckles white. The green of his school uniform seemed absurdly bright against the gray cityscape, a splash of misplaced vitality in a world that had just turned monochromatic. The words, spoken by the one person he admired more than anyone on earth, echoed in his skull, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile architecture of his lifelong ambition. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic, kid. Tears, hot and thick, streamed down his face, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. What was the point? They were just a physical manifestation of the deluge drowning him from the inside. He had been told he was quirkless his entire life. By doctors, by classmates, by Kaken. He had been bullied for it, ostracized for it, pitted for it. But he had always held on to a sliver of hope, a stubborn, irrational belief that his spirit could make up for his body's deficiency. That if he wanted it badly enough, if he studied hard enough, if his heart was heroic enough, the universe would somehow make an exception. All Might had just taken that belief and crushed it into dust. "I'm sorry," the hero had said, his voice softer, laced with a pity that felt worse than any insult. "Without a quirk, you cannot be a hero." The finality of it was absolute. It wasn't an opinion. It was a fact, delivered by the symbol of peace himself. The ultimate authority had passed judgment, and the verdict was guilty of inadequacy. Izuku's gaze drifted downwards. The streets below seemed a world away. Cars moved like patient insects, and people were little more than specks of color. It would be so easy. A single, stupid, desperate step. A fleeting moment of flight before. No. The thought was a cold shock, jolting him back from the edge. He wasn't that person. He couldn't be. Even if he couldn't be a hero, he couldn't be that. But the thought had been there, a dark whisper from a part of him he didn't know existed, and its presence terrified him. He stumbled back from the railing, his legs weak, and sank to the gravelly rooftop, curling into a ball. His sobs were silent, wrenching spasms that shook his entire frame. The hero notebooks in his backpack felt like lead weights, monuments to a wasted life. It was the sudden, concussive boom that snapped him out of it. An explosion, not far away. It was followed by the frantic wail of sirens. Izuku's head shot up, his tear-filled eyes swiveling towards the plume of black smoke rising a few blocks away. His body, trained by years of instinct, tensed. A villain attack. The old Izuku, the Izuku from 20 minutes ago, would have already been scrambling down the stairs, notebook in hand, desperate to see the action. This Izuku remained frozen. What was the point? To watch heroes with incredible quirks do the one thing he would never be able to. To take notes on a future he couldn't have? The thought was agony. He was about to succumb to his despair when a familiar, skeletal figure landed on the rooftop with a wheezing cough. All Might. Or rather, the deflated, true form of the hero. He was holding a plastic bottle that had once contained Izuku's soda, now repurposed to hold. Izuku's blood ran cold. The sludge villain. The one that had attacked him just before. The one All Might had captured. In his shock and All Might's subsequent lecture, he'd completely forgotten the hero was carrying a captured villain in his pocket. "Thought I'd lost him when I was talking to you," All Might rasped, patting his cargo pants. "Wait. Where is he?" The hero's eyes widened in horror as he looked at the empty bottle. His gaze shot towards the smoke. Oh no. The realization hit Izuku like a physical blow. The explosion. The villain. It had escaped because of him. Because he had clung to All Might's leg, distracting him, causing him to drop the bottle in midair. This was his fault. Before the hero could even move, Izuku was on his feet, his despair momentarily incinerated by a new, sharper emotion, guilt. He bolted for the stairs, his worn-out red shoes slapping against the concrete. "Kid, wait! It's too dangerous!" All Might called after him, his voice thin and weak, but Izuku didn't listen. He had to see. He had to know the consequences of his foolishness. He arrived at the scene to find chaos. The narrow street was blocked off, a crowd of onlookers held back by police tape. Pro-heroes were there, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, the rescue-oriented Backdraft, but they were all stalled. The sludge villain had taken another hostage. It was a writhing, amorphous mass of green ooze, its single, malevolent eye scanning the crowd. Small explosions erupted from within its slimy form, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts. "I can't get a grip on him!" Death Arms yelled, his powerful arms sinking uselessly into the sludge. "The explosions are keeping me back. And the kid he's got. I might hurt them." Kamui Woods added, his wooden branches singed. "The kid." Izuku pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He needed to see who it was. He prayed it wasn't anyone he knew, a selfish, desperate prayer. And then he saw him. Through a momentary gap in the sludge, he saw a shock of spiky blonde hair and a pair of furious, terrified red eyes. Kaken. The world seemed to slow down. Izuku saw it all with a terrible clarity. He saw the heroes' hesitation, their quirks perfectly countered by the situation. He saw the growing panic in the crowd, and he saw Bakugo's eyes. For all his bravado, for all his rage, what Izuku saw in that moment was a desperate, suffocating plea for help. The same look of terror Izuku himself had worn not even an hour ago. And then, his legs were moving. He didn't know why. There was no plan. There was no logic. His mind was screaming at him, a litany of his own uselessness. "What are you doing? You're quirkless. You'll die. Stop." But his body didn't listen. He ducked under the police tape, a frantic apology tumbling from his lips. He was running, his bright red shoes a blur against the asphalt. The heroes shouted at him. "Get back here, you idiot! Are you insane?" He saw Bakugo's eyes lock with his. The fury in them was replaced by sheer, dumbfounded shock. "Deku? What the hell are you doing here?" Izuku's mind finally caught up, offering a single, desperate idea. His notebook. Page 25. Sludge villain, vulnerabilities. Seems to be composed of liquid. Solidifying the eyes and teeth might be effective. He didn't have a quirk to do that. But he did have a bright yellow backpack. With a scream that was more fear than fury, he swung the backpack off his shoulders and hurled it directly at the villain's face. It struck the giant, baleful eye with a wet splat. A pencil case tumbled out, its contents jabbing into the sludge. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The villain roared in surprise and pain, its grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Izuku needed. He clawed at the sludge, his fingers sinking into the disgusting, viscous goo. He dug and pulled, trying to free Bakugo's face, to give him air. "Kaken!" he gasped, tears and sweat mingling on his face. "Why?" Bakugo choked out, his voice raw. "Why are you here?" "I don't know," Izuku cried, his voice cracking. "My legs, they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." He looked up at his childhood friend, his tormentor, the person he had always, on some level, admired. "You looked like you were asking for help." That was it. That was the core of it. Stripped of all the analysis, all the fear, all the self-doubt, that was the simple, unbreakable truth. He saw someone in trouble, and he acted. The villain's grip began to tighten again, its rage returning. A massive, slimy tendril rose up, ready to smash Izuku into the pavement. This was it. This was how his stupid, heroic, pointless life ended. He closed his eyes. "I really am pathetic," a voice, booming and familiar, cut through the chaos. Izuku's eyes snapped open to see All Might, his form suddenly massive and muscular, standing between him and the villain. He had a hand on Izuku's shoulder, another holding back the sludge. "I told you the traits that make a great hero," All Might said, a trickle of blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. But I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. With a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city, he drew back his fist. Detroit. Smash! The punch was a force of nature. It didn't just connect with the villain, it weaponized the air itself. A hurricane-force wind tore through the street, dispersing the sludge villain into a fine, harmless mist. The pressure was so immense that the clouds overhead parted, and a sudden downpour began, extinguishing the last of the fires. In the stunned silence that followed, Izuku stood, trembling, drenched in rain and the remnants of the villain. The heroes rushed in, praising All Might, while others began to scold Izuku for his recklessness. He barely heard them. He was just staring at the symbol of peace, his mind a whirlwind of awe and shame. Later, after being checked over by paramedics and thoroughly lectured by the pro-heroes, Izuku began the walk home. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the bone-deep ache of his earlier despair, now compounded by the humiliation of his reckless actions. Kaken had, of course, cornered him on the way. He hadn't thanked him. He had screamed at him, his pride wounded beyond repair. I didn't need your help. I was fine. Don't you ever look down on me again, you damn quirkless nerd. It was just another wound in a day full of them. Izuku walked with his head down, the setting sun casting a long, lonely shadow in front of him. His dream was dead. He was a failure. He had made everything worse. I am here! Izuku yelped and spun around. All Might, in his full heroic glory, skidded to a halt at the end of the street. All Might? What are you doing here? Weren't you swarmed by reporters? Ha! Getting away from them was a piece of cake. Why? Because I am All Might. Poof. In a cloud of steam, he deflated back into his skeletal form, spitting a terrifying amount of blood. Young man, he began, his voice serious as he wiped his chin. I came to thank you. And to apologize. And to make a proposition. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. Huh, if I hadn't heard your story, I would have been nothing but a fake muscle man in a costume, too caught up in my own limitations to act. All Might said, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Izuku. So, thank you? No, it was my fault he was out in the first place. I got in your way. I'm not done. All Might held up a hand, silencing him. What I saw today was something incredible. When all the other heroes, myself included, were standing by, you acted. A timid, quirkless boy, you were the most heroic person on the scene. Izuku felt a fresh wave of tears welling up. This was a different kind of pain. It was the agony of hearing the one thing you've always wanted to hear, but knowing it changed nothing. There are stories about all the great heroes. All Might continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a strange gravitas. Most of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. He took a step closer, and for the first time, Izuku saw a tear trace a path through the grime on the hero's gaunt face. That's what happened to you today, wasn't it? Izuku could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. All Might smiled, a true, genuine smile that seemed to light up the darkening street. Young man, you, too, can become a hero. The world stopped. The birdsong, the distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, it all ceased to exist. The only thing in the universe was that one sentence, that impossible, beautiful, life-altering sentence. It was the key that unlocked the dam within him, and every ounce of pain, despair, and grief from the day erupted in a single, gut-wrenching sob. He collapsed to his knees, the sound raw and broken, the sound of a soul being remade. All Might waited patiently for the storm to pass. When Izuku's sobs subsided into ragged gasps, the hero spoke again. I deem you worthy of my power. Izuku looked up, his face a mess of tears and confusion. Your power? My quirk is not something I was born with. All Might explained, a strange, almost holy light in his eyes. It was passed on to me, like a sacred torch. And now, I wish to pass it on to you. He went on to explain the nature of his quirk, one for all. A power cultivated and passed down through generations, a fusion of stockpiled energy and the ability to transfer itself. A quirk that could be inherited. It was the stuff of comic books, of fantasy. It was insane. And it was the only thing that had ever made sense. So what do you say, young man? All Might finished, his hand outstretched. Will you accept my power? Will you inherit one for all? Izuku didn't hesitate. His dream wasn't dead. It had just been waiting for a miracle. Wiping his face with his sleeve, he pushed himself to his feet, his eyes shining with a renewed, ferocious determination. Yes, he said, his voice hoarse but firm. Yes, I'll do it. All Might's grin was enormous. A quick response. Just as I'd expect. But there is a complication. The hero's sudden shift in tone was jarring. The triumphant energy in the air curdled slightly, replaced by something heavier, more somber. All Might's smile faded, replaced by a look of profound seriousness. He reached into a reinforced pouch on his belt, his movements slow and deliberate. One for all is a raging inferno of pure energy, he said, his gaze locked on Izuku. A body that is not prepared for it, an unprepared vessel, would be torn apart. Your limbs would explode from your body. Izuku paled, the image flashing through his mind with vivid, gory detail. Normally, this requires months, even years, of intense physical conditioning to turn the body into a suitable vessel. We will still do that. 10 months of grueling, non-stop training to remake your body from the ground up. He paused, his expression growing even more conflicted. But for a quirkless vessel, there is another problem. A unique one. The quirk doesn't recognize you as a natural host. It's like trying to run a supercomputer on a watch battery. The connection is unstable. The initial transfer could still incinerate you, no matter how strong your body is. So, I can't have it? Izuku's heart plummeted, the hope that had just bloomed threatening to wither once more. You can't, All Might said quickly. But it requires a catalyst. A key of sorts. Something to bridge the gap between your quirkless nature and the overwhelming power of One for All. With that, he finally withdrew his hand from the pouch. Lying in his large, scarred palm was an object that seemed to drink the fading sunlight from the air. It was a bracer, forged from a metal that was darker than night. It had the dull, non-reflective quality of ancient, pitted iron. It was thick and heavy-looking, designed to cover the wrist and half the forearm. What made Izuku's breath catch in his throat were the carvings. They weren't heroic symbols or decorative patterns. They were intricate, unsettling lines that twisted and writhed, seeming to overlap in impossible ways. They looked less like etchings and more like fossilized veins, and for a terrifying, fleeting moment, Izuku could have sworn he saw them subtly shift. What is that? He whispered, unable to look away. My master, Nana Shimura, called it the regulator. All Might said, and Izuku noted the slight hesitation in his voice. He didn't meet Izuku's eyes, instead staring down at the bracer as if it were a venomous snake. It's an artifact passed down with the quirk for generations. It harmonizes the power with a quirkless user, focusing it and allowing the wielder to survive the transfer and access the power. He held it out towards Izuku. My master had to wear it. She was, like you, born without a quirk. The words were meant to be reassuring, a link to a heroic legacy. But they didn't land that way. Izuku looked from the disturbing bracer to All Might's face. The hero's expression was strained, his usual bravado completely absent. He looked haunted. Is it safe? Izuku asked, the analytical part of his brain finally kicking in, fighting against the tidal wave of his desire. The thing looked ancient, and not in a venerable way. It looked malevolent. All Might was quiet for a long moment. Using One for All will always have a kickback, young man. Especially at first. It puts an immense strain on the body. This bracer helps manage that, but it doesn't eliminate it. There will still be a price. A strain, but it is manageable. He finished, the last words sounding more like he was trying to convince himself than Izuku. It is the only way, the only way. Those 3 words echoed in the space between them. Izuku looked at the bracer. It was ugly. It was unsettling. A cold, heavy feeling radiated from it, a palpable aura of stillness and age. But then he looked past it, at the future it represented. A future where he could stand tall. A future where he could save people with a smile. A future where he was a hero. What was a little strain compared to that? What was a strange, ugly piece of metal compared to a lifetime of impotent despair? His desperation was a hunger so vast it could swallow any doubt. He reached out with a trembling hand. "I'll wear it," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." A flicker of something, was it guilt? Regret, passed across All Might's face before he masked it with a determined nod. "Very well." He took Izuku's left arm. The moment his cold, callous fingers wrapped around Izuku's wrist, a shiver went down the boy's spine. All Might positioned the bracer. The iron was unnaturally cold, a deep, penetrating chill that felt like it was sinking right into his bones. He carefully brought the two halves of the bracer together. It closed not with a simple click, but with a heavy, final thunk, a sound of permanence, of a lock turning for which there was no key. It was heavy. Not just in physical weight, but in a way that felt existential. It felt like an anchor, tying him to something ancient and deep. "No," All Might said, his voice regaining some of its familiar boom. "For the transfer itself. The traditional method is, well," he plucked a single strand of his golden hair. "Eat this." Izuku's mind, already reeling, simply short-circuited. "Huh!" And so began the most grueling 10 months of Izuku Midoriya's life. All Might's training plan, the aim to pass, American Dream Plan, was hell. He hauled discarded refrigerators on Dagoba Municipal Beach, the urban landfill that had become his personal training ground. He pushed, he pulled, he lifted, he ran. Every muscle in his body screamed, burned, and tore, only to be rebuilt stronger. All Might was a relentless taskmaster, but he was also a constant source of encouragement, his booming laughter echoing across the mountains of trash. Throughout it all, the bracer was a constant presence. It never came off. Izuku tried once in the shower, but there was no seam, no clasp, no hinge to be found. It was as if the metal had fused together. It never got warm, even on the hottest days. It remained perpetually, unnervingly cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the sweat and heat of his exertions. He learned to hide it under a long-sleeved shirt or a black athletic wristband, not wanting to answer any questions from his mother. It was about 3 months into the training that he first felt it. He was trying to move a particularly large, rusted washing machine, his muscles straining to their absolute limit. In a moment of frustration, he tried to do what All Might had described, to clench his buttocks and yell, "Smash!" from the depths of his heart, to try and tap into the power that now theoretically resided within him. The moment he reached for that inner wellspring, a sensation shot up his arm from the bracer. It wasn't the fiery explosion of power he expected. It was a spike of absolute, needle-sharp cold, a pain so intense it felt like his bones were being flash-frozen. He cried out and stumbled back, clutching his arm. The pain receded as quickly as it came, but it left something else in its wake. A thought, clear as a bell, slithered into his mind. It wasn't his own. It felt foreign, ancient, and filled with a chilling contempt. "You're not worthy." Izuku shook his head, his heart hammering. He must have imagined it. It was just the pain, or his own deeply ingrained insecurities bubbling to the surface. He'd been telling himself he was worthless for years. It was only natural for his subconscious to fight back against this new reality. He took a deep breath, dismissed it, and went back to work, his pulls on the washing machine's rope a little more frantic. But it happened again. And again. A month later, while doing pull-ups on a rusted girder, he tried to channel the power again. The same icy spike of pain lanced up his arm, making him lose his grip and fall into a pile of soft sand. This time, the whisper was different. A quirkless failure, pretending to be strong. He got up, brushing himself off, his face pale. He was starting to get headaches, sharp, splitting migraines that would come on suddenly and vanish just as fast, always after he tried to touch the edges of his new power. He told All Might about the pain in his arm. That's the kickback I was telling you about, young man." The hero had boomed, clapping him on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "The regulator is working. It's stopping the power from blowing your arm off and converting it into a manageable jolt. It means you're getting closer to being able to handle it." Ha! Izuku wanted to believe him. He desperately needed to believe him. But he didn't mention the thoughts. How could he? How could he explain that it felt like someone else was whispering insults inside his own head? All Might would think he was crazy. He was probably just stressed. The training was immense. The pressure was unbelievable. It had to be a side effect of exhaustion. He pushed it down. He compartmentalized it. The pain, the whispers, the headaches, they were part of the price. The cost of admission to his dream. Every hero had scars. These would be his. By the 10th month, he had transformed. The scrawny, timid boy was gone, replaced by a lean, muscular young man. He had successfully cleared the entire section of the beach, his final triumphant roar echoing over the now pristine sand as the sun rose. He had done it. He was a worthy vessel, but the symptoms had worsened, subtly. The skin under the bracer was now perpetually discolored, a faint, bruised purple that no amount of scrubbing could get rid of. The whispers were no longer just simple insults. Sometimes, after a particularly grueling session where he tried to access One for All, he'd experience flashes of disorientation. He'd look at a pile of trash and for a split second, see a battlefield littered with bodies. He'd hear All Might's laugh and for a moment, it would sound like a scream of agony. They were fleeting, gone in an instant, but they left him feeling shaken and unnerved. He started rubbing the cold iron of the bracer as a nervous tick, a subconscious gesture to ground himself. He never told All Might. The hero was so proud of him, so full of hope for his future. Izuku couldn't bear to disappoint him, or to cast a shadow on the incredible gift he had been given. This was his burden to carry. His alone. The morning of the UA entrance exam arrived, crisp and bright. Izuku stood before the towering gates of the most prestigious hero academy in the world. The H-shaped glass buildings seemed to pierce the sky, gleaming with promise. Other students milled about, buzzing with nervous energy, showing off their spectacular quirks. Izuku stood apart from them, wearing his middle school uniform for the last time. He looked down at his left hand, clenching it into a fist. He had spent 10 months paying the physical price. Today, he would finally get to see what he had paid for. The power of One for All, the power of the symbol of peace, thrummed beneath his skin, a sleeping giant. He took a deep, steadying breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. He was ready. He had to be. As he took his first step towards the gate, towards his destiny, he felt the familiar, unyielding cold of the iron bracer against his skin. It was a stark reminder of the strange, dark bargain he had made on a lonely street 10 months ago. A promise of ultimate power, shackled to an inheritor's burden. The air in the briefing hall had crackled with nervous energy, a tangible thing that smelled of sweat, perfume, and the faint, metallic scent of 100 different quirks activating at once. Izuku had sat rigid in his seat, the booming voice of President Mike washing over him as he explained the rules of the practical exam. 1-point robots, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. A sprawling, full-scale cityscape for a battleground. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. It was a nightmare. His left wrist was cold. Colder than the air-conditioned hall, colder than the sweat beading on his forehead. The black iron of the regulator, hidden beneath the sleeve of his green tracksuit, was a constant, chilling reminder of the unstable power thrumming within him. It was a promise and a threat coiled together. Now, standing inside Battle Center B, the promise felt very far away, and the threat was all too real. The moment President Mike had screamed, "Gio!" the other examinees had exploded into action. A boy with engines in his legs blasted past Izuku in a cloud of dust. A girl with pink skin shot acid, melting a 1-pointer into slag. A boy with a laser naval pirouette, cutting a 2-pointer in half. It was a symphony of power and confidence, and Izuku was a silent, frozen spectator. He shook himself out of his stupor. Move! You have to move! His legs, honed by 10 months of hellish training, finally obeyed. He sprinted into the labyrinth of faux city streets, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for a target. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. He had the greatest quirk in the world sleeping inside him, and he was utterly terrified to wake it up. He rounded a corner and saw it, a lone 1-pointer, its single red optical sensor swiveling towards him. It was the weakest model, bulky and slow. Perfect. This was his chance. Okay, Izuku, you can do this, he muttered, his voice trembling. He took a low stance, remembering All Might's words. Clench your buttocks and scream it from your heart, he focused, trying to draw the power of one for all into his right arm, channeling it for a single, decisive punch. He reached for that inner reservoir of energy, and the curse answered first. An excruciating spike of cold shot from the bracer on his left wrist, arcing across his chest and into his right arm like a bolt of cryogenic lightning. It wasn't the feeling of a limb about to explode. It was the feeling of one being frozen solid from the inside out. The pain was so sharp, so alien, it stole his breath. And with the pain came the whisper, slithering into the forefront of his mind like a venomous snake. You think this power is yours? Foolish child. Izuku cried out, a strangled gasp, and flinched back instinctively. The nascent green energy flickering around his fist died instantly. The one-pointer, taking advantage of his hesitation, swung its heavy metal arm. Izuku stumbled backward, barely avoiding the blow as it smashed into the asphalt where he'd been standing, sending shards of rock flying. He fell hard, scraping his palms on the rough ground. The robot turned its attention to another examinee, who promptly disabled it with a flick of their electrified fingers. The student shot Izuku a look of pitying disdain before running off in search of more points. 0 points. Izuku pushed himself up, his right arm numb and tingling from the phantom cold. His head throbbed. The whisper had been clearer this time, more articulate. He shook his head violently, as if to physically dislodge the thought. It's just stress, he told himself, the mantra feeling thinner and more frayed each time he repeated it. It's the kickback All Might warned me about. Manageable. But it didn't feel manageable. It felt parasitic. He forced himself to run again, deeper into the city. Panic was a physical thing now, a clawing beast in his chest. The 10-minute exam felt like it was slipping through his fingers like sand. He saw the friendly-looking girl from the entrance, the one with the round face and brown hair, making robots float with a touch before letting them crash to the ground. She already had a pile of points. He saw the serious, blue-haired boy from the briefing hall moving with incredible speed and precision, disabling robots with powerful kicks. Everyone was scoring points. Everyone was proving their worth, and he was doing nothing. He was a fraud. A quirkless boy in a hero's costume who had been handed a miracle he was too cowardly to use. The whisper came back, unbidden, laced with a cold amusement. They all know what you are. A pretender. Shut up, he hissed under his breath, earning him a strange look from a girl with vines for hair as she sprinted past. He saw another cluster of robots up ahead, 2 one-pointers and a 2-pointer. This was it. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He couldn't afford to fail. He ignored the gnawing fear and ran towards them, targeting the 2-pointer first. Don't think. Just act. Like on the beach. Like All Might. He leaped, drawing back his fist. He braced for the icy pain, trying to push through it. He channeled the power, a sliver of it, just enough to make a difference. The cold came, sharp and vicious, but he fought it. Green sparks crackled around his arm. Weak. The whisper was a lash of contempt. You can't even handle this much? Pathetic. The psychic jab was as debilitating as the physical pain. His focus shattered. The power, untethered by his concentration, surged uncontrollably. Instead of a focused punch, it was a messy, chaotic burst. His arm didn't break, but the recoil sent him spinning through the air. He slammed into the side of a building and slid to the ground, his ears ringing. The 2-pointer, barely scratched, turned its attention to him. He was saved by a flash of purple light and the smell of grapes as a flurry of sticky balls shot from a short, panicked-looking boy, immobilizing the robot. The boy, Mineta, gave Izuku a thumbs up before scurrying away. 0 points. Again, tears of frustration pricked at the corners of Izuku's eyes. This wasn't working. Every time he tried to use one for all, the bracer punished him. It wasn't just pain. It was a targeted assault on his confidence, his sanity. It was as if the bracer had a mind of its own, a malevolent will dedicated to making him fail. The ground began to tremble. At first, it was a low rumble, the kind you might feel when a subway train passes deep underground. But it grew rapidly. The trembling became a violent shaking. Car alarms, not yet disabled, blared in a discordant chorus. Dust rained down from the tops of the artificial buildings. A shadow fell over the street, vast and absolute. Izuku looked up, and his blood turned to ice. It was the zero-pointer. The gimmick. The arena trap. President Mike had laughed it off, telling them to just run away. But seeing it in person was a different matter entirely. It was colossal, a titan of metal and wiring that dwarfed the 10-story buildings around it. Its massive treads churned up the street, crushing everything in their path. A single, glowing red eye, the size of a bus, scanned the battlefield. Panic erupted. Every other examinee, without a second thought, turned and fled. Their faces were masks of terror. "It's the zero-pointer! Run! We can't fight that thing!" Izuku's own instincts screamed at him to join them. His body was already turning, his muscles coiling to sprint away. Survival was the only logical response. And then he heard it, a small, pained cry. Ow! He froze, his head snapping back towards the monstrous robot. There, at its base, was a pile of rubble from a building it had clipped. And trapped beneath it was the nice girl. Uraraka. One of her legs was pinned beneath a massive slab of concrete, her face pale with pain and fear as she watched the unstoppable machine bear down on her. The world went silent. The panicked shouts, the grinding of the robot's treads, the pounding of his own heart, it all faded into a dull background hum. All he could see was her face. All he could hear was that small, helpless sound. He remembered All Might's words on that street, what felt like a lifetime ago. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. He remembered the look in Kaken's eyes and the grip of the sludge villain. A desperate plea for help. He saw that same look in Uraraka's wide, terrified eyes now. The fear was still there. The terror of the zero-pointer. The dread of the bracer's icy punishment. But something else rose up to meet it, something stronger. A furious, protective instinct. A pure, undiluted desire to save. His legs were moving. He sprinted towards the danger, back into the path of the giant. The blue-haired boy Ida, who was running past, saw him. "What are you doing? Are you mad? There are no points for fighting that thing." Izuku didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. He just ran. He knew a simple punch wouldn't be enough. A small burst of power, the kind he had been failing to use all day, wouldn't even scratch it. He needed more. He needed everything. He thought of his mother, crying and telling him she was proud. He thought of All Might, and trusting him with his legacy. He thought of 10 months of sweat and pain on that beach. He thought of a lifetime of being told he was worthless. "I am not worthless." He channeled one for all. Not into his arm. Into his legs. He pushed past the spike of cold, pushed past the whisper that was now rising to a venomous hiss in his mind. He poured every ounce of his will, every drop of his desperation, into a single, explosive action. The power answered. Green lightning, brilliant and untamed, erupted around his legs. The ground beneath his feet cracked as he leaped. He didn't just jump. He launched himself into the air like a cannonball, soaring 50, 100, 200 feet into the sky until he was level with the zero-pointer's head. The feeling was terrifying, exhilarating. For a glorious second, he was flying. He drew back his right arm, the sleeve of his tracksuit tearing away. Now. All the power. Everything he had. He knew it would break him. He accepted it. It was a worthy trade. He channeled 100% of one for all into his fist. This time, the reaction from the bracer was not a spike of cold. It was an explosion. A supernova of malevolent energy. The black iron, dormant until now, erupted with a blinding, blood-red light. The light didn't just shine from it, it seemed to bleed from the intricate, vein-like carvings, which pulsed as if they were alive. A new kind of pain, infinitely worse than the cold, screamed through him. It was a feeling of being simultaneously burned and consumed. Black, jagged lines, like scorched veins, erupted from beneath the bracer, spreading up his arm in a horrifying, web-like pattern, crawling over his skin in an instant. They reached his shoulder, snaking towards his neck and chest. His mind, which had been so clear a moment ago, fractured. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a cacophony, a legion of screaming voices flooding his consciousness. Failure. It hurts. You can't save anyone. Give up, give in. Another sacrifice to the grudge. Worthless. Fear. despair, rage, agony. It was the raw, undiluted emotional feedback of 100 lifetimes of struggle, pouring directly into his soul. His vision swam. The world dissolved into a smear of color and light, the zero-pointer's face twisting into a demonic caricature. But his body, running on that single, pure heroic impulse, completed the motion. Smash! His fist connected with the robot's head. The impact was apocalyptic. The robot's thick metal plating crumpled like tin foil. A shockwave, visible to the naked eye, blasted outwards, shattering every window in a 2-block radius. The zero-pointer's head imploded, and its colossal body, deprived of its command center, groaned and began to topple backward, away from Uraraka. Izuku was left hanging in the air for a single, silent moment. His right arm was a mangled ruin of purple and red, bent at an impossible angle. Both of his legs, from the force of the jump, were shattered, flapping uselessly. The black veins on his arm pulsed with a faint crimson light before slowly, reluctantly, receding back towards the bracer, leaving behind a dark, bruised, and sickeningly discolored patch of skin that looked dead. Then gravity remembered him. He began to fall. The cacophony in his head subsided, leaving behind a ringing silence and a splitting, world-ending migraine. His last conscious thought was not of his own safety, but a desperate prayer. Did I save her? As he plummeted towards the ground, he passed out, succumbing to the overwhelming physical and mental trauma. He would have become a red smear on the pavement if it hadn't been for Uraraka. Freed from the rubble by his heroic act, she saw him falling. With a cry, she slapped her hands together, a look of intense concentration on her face. Release! She had to shout, deactivating her quirk on the rubble, before slapping him on the back just before he hit the ground. Float! His body, now weightless, was saved from the impact. But the cost had been paid. The exam timer blared, signaling the end. Izuku Midoriya lay unconscious on the ground, his body broken, his quirk used for the first time, and his final score a perfect, heroic 0. The first thing Chio Shizenji, the youthful heroine, recovery girl, noticed was the energy. It was wrong. She had seen countless injuries in her long career, from simple fractures to catastrophic, quirk-induced cellular decay. She understood the energetics of the human body better than anyone, but the energy radiating from the unconscious green-haired boy was vile. Good heavens, Tashinori, what did you do to this child? She demanded, her voice sharp as she bustled over to the cot in her infirmary. All Might, in his skeletal form, stood anxiously by the door, wringing his hands. It's the kickback from One for All, Chio, he said, his voice strained. His body wasn't fully prepared. Kickback? She scoffed, her eyes narrowing as she began her examination. The initial damage was obvious, a severely fractured right arm and 2 shattered legs, standard fare for a reckless first-time power user. A simple kiss, a drain of his stamina, and those would be mended. But there was something else. Something much more disturbing. She gently pushed up the tattered sleeve of his left arm, the one that wasn't broken. And she saw it. A heavy, black iron bracer was clamped around his wrist. It was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, and the skin around it, in a perfect band, was a deep, bruised purple-black. It looked necrotic, the tissue starved of life. But it was the faint, vein-like pattern spreading up his forearm from the bracer that truly alarmed her. They were faint now, like old bruises, but she could sense a lingering, corruptive energy clinging to them. It felt ancient, hungry, and deeply, fundamentally malicious. This is not a kickback, she said, her voice dangerously low as she shot a glare at All Might. This is a contamination. What is this thing? She gestured to the bracer with her syringe-shaped cane. All Might flinched. It's the regulator. My master wore it. It's necessary for a quirkless user to handle the transfer. Necessary? Recovery Girl leaned in closer, her medical senses screaming at her. She could feel it now, a subtle war being waged on a cellular level. The boy's own life force, his natural stamina, was fighting against the creeping, parasitic drain originating from the bracer. Tashinori, this artifact is not regulating anything. It feels like it's poisoning him. It's siphoning his life force and leaving behind this filth. She placed her hand on Izuku's forehead. His stamina reserves were dangerously low, far lower than they should have been from just his injuries. It was as if something had already taken a tithe of his energy before she had even begun. "I can heal the bones," she said, her tone grim. "But I can't fix this." She tapped a finger on the discolored, dead-looking skin on his arm. "This is necrotic tissue damage, but it's not from any trauma I recognize. It's like his very cells are being corrupted and extinguished. And the psychic feedback, his brainwave patterns are a mess. It's a miracle he's only unconscious and not completely catatonic." All Might's face, already gaunt, seemed to shrink further. The guilt was plain on his features. I didn't know. Nana never said. She just said it was a burden she had to carry. She probably didn't know either," Recovery Girl muttered, straightening up. "Or she was too stubborn to admit it. This is dark, Tashinori. Older and darker than One for All, I'd wager. You haven't just passed on a torch. You may have shackled this boy to a gravestone." The weight of her words hung in the sterile air of the infirmary. All Might looked at the broken, unconscious form of his chosen successor, the boy who had shown more heroism in 10 minutes than most pros showed in a year, and a cold dread, colder than any injury he had ever sustained, settled deep in his heart. What had he done? Recovery Girl sighed, her frustration giving way to a weary resolve. "Well, what's done is done. Let's get him stable." She leaned down, puckered her lips, and planted a gentle kiss on Izuku's forehead. His body jolted as her quirk activated. The boy's own energy was marshaled, redirected to fuel a hyper-accelerated healing process. The sickening crunch and scrape of bones resetting and fusing echoed softly in the quiet room. It was a draining, exhaustive process, but it was effective. The broken limbs were mended, but the blackened skin around the bracer remained. The corruptive energy, though diminished, still clung to him, a permanent stain on his life force. Izuku woke up with a gasp, his head feeling like it had been split in two with an axe. The white ceiling of the infirmary swam into focus. The last thing he remembered was punching, the feeling of his fist connecting with metal. The noise. The pain. The voices. He sat up, a wave of dizziness washing over him. His body ached with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that comes after a high fever. He looked down at his arms and legs. They were fine. Healed. He wiggled his fingers on his right hand, marveling at the lack of pain. Recovery Girl's quirk was amazing. "Ah, you're awake." The elderly hero was at her desk, filling out paperwork. "Don't push yourself. You used up nearly all your stamina healing those limbs. Any more and you would have been in a coma for a week." My legs. My arm?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Broken in 3 places each," she said matter-of-factly. "You're lucky that nice Uraraka girl stopped your fall. Now lie back down and rest." Izuku obeyed, his mind racing. He did it. He had used One for All. He had saved her. But the exam, had he passed? He got no points. He must have failed. The familiar despair began to creep back in. As if reading his mind, All Might burst through the door, this time in his heroic form. "I am here! With good news!" He explained everything. How Izuku's incredible, selfless act had moved the judges. How they had a secret scoring system, rescue points. For saving another examinee from mortal danger, he had been awarded 60 points, more than enough to pass. He was in. He had made it into UA. Tears of joy streamed down Izuku's face. All the pain, all the struggle, it had all been worth it. He had achieved his dream. He was so caught up in the euphoria that he almost didn't notice the gaps. It was only later, as All Might was leaving and Recovery Girl was giving him a final checkup, that he tried to fully recall the moment of his triumph. He could remember the leap. He could remember drawing back his fist. He could remember shouting, "Smash!" But the moment of impact? The feeling of his knuckles on the metal? The sight of the robot's head caving in? It was blank. A patch of static in his memory. He could remember the moments before and he could remember the sensation of falling, but the climax of the event itself was just gone. A missing frame in the film of his life. He instinctively reached over and touched the cold iron of the bracer on his left wrist. The skin underneath it felt numb and strange. A splitting pain flared behind his eyes, a phantom echo of the earlier migraine. Is something wrong, dearie? Recovery girl asked, noticing his pained expression. No, just a headache, he lied, forcing a smile. But as he lay there, basking in the glow of his acceptance into UA High, a new and terrifying thought took root in his mind. The bracer had taken a physical toll, he had expected that. But what if the price of his dream wasn't just broken bones and scarred skin? What if, every time he used this incredible power, the curse took something more? What if it took pieces of him? The first day at UA High should have been the single greatest day of Izuku Midoriya's life. In many ways it was. Walking through the colossal front doors of the school, the same doors he had only ever seen in pictures, felt like stepping into a dream. The sunlight filtered through the building's immense, H-shaped windows, cast long, hopeful beams across the polished floors. The air hummed with the excited chatter of the best and brightest, a generation of future heroes taking their first tentative steps towards greatness. It was perfect. It was everything he had ever wanted. And it was agonizing. For Izuku, the light felt a little too bright, stinging his eyes. The ambient chatter of his new classmates wasn't a pleasant hum. It was a low-grade static that grated on the edges of his nerves, feeding the dull, persistent headache that had become his constant companion since the entrance exam. He walked the halls with a tense, guarded posture, his left hand shoved deep into his pocket, his fingers curled around the unnervingly cold, unyielding iron of the regulator. It felt less like a part of his costume, and more like a manacle. He found Class 1A, the door comically oversized, and hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. This was it. The inner sanctum. Stepping through that door meant there was no turning back. He steeled himself, slid the door open, and was immediately confronted by the sight of Katsuki Bakugo with his feet on his desk, being lectured by the serious, blue-haired boy from the exam. Ida Tenya. Izuku's anxiety spiked. He tried to shrink into himself, to become invisible, but it was too late. Ida's head swiveled towards him, his movements as precise and robotic as his speech. It's you! Ida declared, marching over. Good morning! I am from semi-private academy. My name is Ida Tenya. I am Midoriya. Izuku stammered, flinching slightly at the intensity. It's nice to meet you, Ida. Midoriya. You deduced the true nature of the practical exam, did you not? Ida chopped the air with his hand. I was a fool to misjudge you. You, who saw the hidden meaning in the test, are clearly the superior student. Before Izuku could even process the backhanded compliment, a cheerful voice chimed in from behind him. Oh, it's you! The plain-looking boy. He turned to see her, Uraraka Achiko, the girl he had saved. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, her brown eyes sparkling. You passed! Just like President Mike said. That punch was amazing! Wow! She vibrated with energy, making little punching motions in the air. It was like bam! Izuku's face erupted in a blush. Oh, well, It's thanks to you that I passed, Uraraka. You saved me from falling. Huh! How did you know my name? I heard you say it. He managed, his brain feeling like a short-circuiting mess. Their pleasant, if awkward, conversation was a small island of normalcy in the storm of his anxiety. For a moment, the headache receded. For a moment, the cold weight on his wrist seemed a little lighter. He was talking to his new classmates. He was making friends. Maybe it would be okay. If you're here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave. The voice came from the floor. It was dry, monotone, and utterly devoid of energy. Everyone froze. Lying on the floor behind Uraraka, zipped into a yellow sleeping bag like a giant, exhausted caterpillar, was a man with tired eyes and a scruffy beard. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, the man said, unzipping himself and standing up. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Life is short. You're all lacking in common sense. He took a sip from a juice pouch. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Nice to meet you. The collective shock of the class was a palpable thing. This was their teacher? This exhausted-looking underground hero? Aizawa wasted no time. He pulled a blue UA gym uniform from his sleeping bag and tossed it onto his desk. Put these on immediately and meet me on the P grounds. The locker room was a chaotic mix of nervous energy and bravado. Boys were comparing their middle school feats, showing off minor aspects of their quirks. Izuku changed quickly and quietly in a corner, careful to keep the long sleeve of his shirt pulled down over his left wrist. He could feel Bakugo's eyes on him from across the room, a stare filled not with the usual simmering rage, but with a new, sharper edge of suspicion and disgust. Izuku avoided his gaze, focusing on tying his red shoes, the same shoes that had carried him into his dream and his curse. On the field, the reality of his situation crashed back down on him. A quirk apprehension test? The class exclaimed in unison. But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked, her voice laced with disappointment. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa said, his tone flat. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how teachers run their classes. He turned to face them, his eyes sweeping over the 20 students. You've been doing these since junior high too, right? Physical fitness tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. This country still insists on standardizing records and treating everyone the same. It's not rational. He held up a measuring device. The person who scores last in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential and will be punished with expulsion. A wave of panic washed over the class. Expulsion? On the first day? It was insane. It was terrifying. It was a death sentence for Izuku. His blood ran cold. The low-level headache he'd been nursing sharpened into a piercing throb behind his left eye. He couldn't compete in these tests without his quirk. His body was strong, yes, but strong by normal human standards. He would be up against people who could create explosions, turn their bodies to steel, or run faster than a bicycle. Without One for All, he would be dead last. But using it, his hand instinctively went to his left wrist, rubbing the fabric over the cold iron. He remembered the feeling of the entrance exam. The icy pain. The whispers. The fracturing of his mind. The stolen memories. The thought of tapping into that power again, even a little, sent a tremor of pure fear through him. It wasn't a tool. It was a poison. He had no choice. It was a simple, brutal equation: use the cursed quirk, or be expelled and lose everything. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku was up against Bakugo. As they took their places, Bakugo leaned in close, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Don't think I don't know something's wrong with you, Deku," he hissed, his red eyes narrowed. "I saw it at the exam. That power, it's not right. It's like a disease. Whatever you did, whatever cheat you used to get in here, I'll find out. And I'll crush you." The timer went off. "On your mark, get set." Boom. Bakugo propelled himself forward with a series of controlled explosions. "AP shot!" he roared. 4.13 seconds. Izuku just ran. He pumped his legs, pushing his body to its absolute limit, the Dagoba Beach training serving him well. 7.02 seconds. It was a respectable time for a normal human. Here, it was pathetic. He was already near the bottom of the pack. It continued like that. Grip strength. He managed 56 kilograms. The hulking, multi-armed student, Shoji, registered 540 kilograms. Standing long jump. He cleared the sandbox. The frog-like girl, Ajui, bounded effortlessly across it several times over. Repeated side steps. He was clumsy and slow compared to the shimmering, dazzling Oyama or the impossibly nimble Mineta. With each test, the pit in his stomach grew deeper. He was failing. His dream was slipping through his fingers, just hours after he'd grasped it. The whispers, silent until now, began to stir in the back of his mind, faint and insidious. Just like always. Quirkless. Useless. He shook his head, trying to focus. He just needed to get through this. Just one good score could make all the difference. Then came the ball throw. Aizawa gestured to the chalk circle. "Bakugo, you were first in the practical exam. How far could you throw a softball in junior high?" 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. "Try it with your quirk." Bakugo grinned, a feral, vicious expression. He wound up, and with a tremendous explosion, launched the ball into the sky. Die! He screamed, the word more a statement of purpose than a random curse. The ball sailed through the air, leaving a smoke trail. Aizawa held up the device. 705.2 meters. The class gasped in awe. This was the level of UA. Izuku's turn came. This was it. His one chance. A softball throw was a perfect test for a single, focused burst of one for all. He could pour all his power into it, just like the entrance exam, but localized. He wouldn't need to break his whole body. Just a part of it. The thought sent a jolt of fear through him. He stepped into the circle, the softball feeling heavy and slick in his sweaty palm. He took a deep breath. Okay. One for all. Full cowl. No, All Might said I'm not ready for that. A single point of contact, like a flick. My finger. If I break one finger, Recovery Girl can heal it. I can handle that. He drew his arm back, focusing his mind. He reached for the power, for that vast, oceanic wellspring of energy. He braced himself for the icy pain from the bracer. Here it comes. Green energy crackled to life, swirling around his arm. The power felt immense, intoxicating. He swung his arm forward, ready to unleash a throw that would shatter every record, and then his arm went limp. The green energy vanished. He threw the ball with the force of a normal human. It landed with a pathetic thump just a few dozen meters away. Izuku stared in confusion, his arm tingling strangely. I erased your quirk. He whipped his head around. Aizawa's eyes were glowing a terrifying red, his black hair floating around his head as if underwater. His capture weapon, the long scarf around his neck, writhed like a nest of snakes. That entrance exam was certainly not rational, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously calm as he strode towards Izuku. A person who can't control their own power is useless. You intend to break your bones again? To become a useless burden after saving one person, hoping someone else will come and save you? The words were a physical blow. Aizawa's logic was flawless, cutting right through Izuku's desperate justifications. Izuku stammered. That's not what Aizawa's capture weapon shot out, wrapping around Izuku's body and yanking him forward until they were face to face. Whatever your circumstances, you have no potential. With your power, you cannot be a hero. The red glow in his eyes faded, and his hair fell. I've returned your quirk. You have one more throw. Get it over with. He walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the circle, his heart a block of ice in his chest. You cannot be a hero. The same words. The same verdict. First from All Might, now from his homeroom teacher. The whispers in his head seized upon the phrase, amplifying it, twisting it. He sees you. He knows what you are. A failure. A broken toy. You don't belong here. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. No. He wouldn't accept that. He had come too far. He had a secret that Aizawa didn't know. He wasn't just self-destructive. He was learning. He had an idea. He picked up the ball again. He wouldn't pour the power into his whole arm. He would channel it, focus it, force it down to a single, tiny point. The very tip of his index finger. Minimize the contact, minimize the damage. It was a desperate gamble, an act of precision he had never even attempted before. He took his stance, his mind a battlefield. On one side was his own desperate will to succeed. On the other was the creeping, parasitic dread of the curse. He drew his arm back, and this time, he didn't just reach for the power. He tried to build a cage around it. He visualized the energy of one for all flowing down his arm, through his hand, but being stopped by a mental barrier, forced down a narrow channel into his finger. He felt the telltale spike of cold from the bracer, but it was different. Because he was fighting back, the curse seemed to push harder. It wasn't a generalized pain. It was a sharp, stabbing sensation right behind his eyeball, as if an icicle was being driven into his brain. Stop fighting, the whisper hissed. No longer a simple thought but a commanding presence. Izuku grit his teeth, a low growl escaping his lips. He pushed through the mental agony, his vision blurring. He swung his arm, and at the very last second, he released the dam. The power, concentrated into a single point, was immense. The tip of his index finger exploded with force, launching the ball like a cannon shot. The air pressure alone created a massive shockwave that kicked up a huge cloud of dust. The ball became a comet, soaring high into the sky, a tiny speck disappearing into the blue. The immediate aftermath was a storm of sensation. His index finger was shattered, swollen, and glowing an angry purple. The pain was excruciating, but it was the other pain that made him gasp and stumble, clutching his head. The ice pick in his brain twisted, sending a wave of vertigo through him. For a single, terrifying second, the world distorted. The clear blue sky seemed to flash a dark, bloody red. The cheering of his classmates sounded like distant screams, and standing behind Aizawa, who was looking at his device with a shocked expression, Izuku saw it. A flicker, a distortion in the air, a patch of shadow deeper than any other, vaguely man-shaped, with no features save for a chilling sense of ancient, malevolent intelligence. It was there for a fraction of a heartbeat, a silent observer, and then it was gone. Aizawa-sensei, Izuku panted, trying to keep his balance. I can still move. Aizawa looked up from his device, then at Izuku. He saw the broken finger, the sweat-drenched face, the sheer, agonized effort. Then his eyes flickered down, catching a detail others might have missed. On Izuku's swollen, purple finger, for just a second before they faded, were tiny, spidery black lines. They looked like fractured ink, a miniature version of the horrific pattern that had covered his entire arm during the entrance exam. They pulsed once, a sickly dark energy, and then vanished, leaving only the bruised flesh behind. Aizawa's expression was unreadable, a mixture of shock, intrigue, and a deep, professional concern. He held up the device for the class to see. 705.3 meters, a tenth of a meter farther than Bakugo. The class erupted. He beat Bakugo. His finger is swollen. It looks like what happened at the exam. What a quirk! Only Bakugo was silent. His body was rigid, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was staring at Izuku, not with anger, but with a look of pure, unadulterated shock and something else, revulsion. He had seen it too. The flash of black on Izuku's finger. It wasn't power. It was rot. It was a sickness that was spreading. His fists began to smoke. Deku! He roared, blasting himself forward. What the hell was that? Explain yourself! Before he could reach Izuku, he was entangled in Aizawa's capture weapon, his struggles useless. Stop using your quirk, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously bored, his eyes glowing red again. I'm getting dry eye. As the rest of the day's test continued, Izuku did his best to compete, but he was hobbled, both by his broken finger and the lingering mental fog from the curse's attack. After the tests, Uraraka and Ida rushed over to him, their faces a mixture of awe and worry. Midoriya! Are you okay? Uraraka asked, pointing at his bandaged finger. Recovery Girl had already healed him, but the experience was still fresh. That was incredible, but your finger just exploded. It is an illogical and self-destructive use of one's abilities, Ida added, though his tone held a new respect. However, your result was undeniable. You possess a truly powerful quirk. Izuku tried to smile, but it felt like a mask. I'm fine, he said, his voice a little too sharp. Really? I have a lot to work on. He instinctively pulled his left arm closer to his body, away from their concerned gazes. Their friendliness felt dangerous. If they got too close, they might see the cracks. They might see the darkness clinging to him. The paranoia, a cold byproduct of the curse, whispered that their concern was just a prelude to discovery. He made a hasty excuse about needing to get his bag and shuffled away, leaving them looking confused and a little hurt. He could feel their eyes on his back, and it felt like a physical weight. The final rankings were posted. Izuku, thanks to his one incredible throw, had managed to avoid last place. He was 20th. The student in 21st place was Mineta, who was now weeping hysterically. Oh, and by the way, Aizawa said, a wicked grin spreading across his face for the first time. The expulsion thing was a lie. The class stared, dumbfounded. It was a rational deception to push you to your limits. Silence. Then chaos. Only a sharp, dark-haired girl, Yayorozu, seemed to have figured it out. Izuku barely registered it. He was just relieved. He had survived. But the cost was becoming clearer with every passing hour. That night, back in the safety and solitude of his all-might-themed bedroom, the triumph of the day felt hollow. The posters of his smiling idol seemed to mock him, their bright colors a stark contrast to the encroaching darkness in his own mind. He was a student at UA. He had friends, or at least the potential for friends. He had a teacher who, despite his harsh methods, was pushing him to be better. But he was also cursed. He sat at his desk, pulling out his well-worn hero analysis for the future number 13. He opened it to a new page, intending to write down everything he'd learned about his classmates' quirks. He started with Bakugo's, his pen scratching across the paper. Quirk, explosion. Secretes nitroglycerin like sweat. His hand faltered. His gaze drifted to the margins of the page. Without thinking, he began to doodle. But they weren't sketches of heroic costumes or support gear. They were spidery, unsettling lines, twisting into patterns that mimicked the carvings on the regulator. He drew Aizawa, but his eyes were black pits, and the shadow he'd hallucinated loomed behind him. He drew his own shattered finger, the black, vein-like mark stark against the paper. He slammed the notebook shut, his breathing ragged. This was wrong. The curse was bleeding into every part of his life, tainting even his most precious hobby. He couldn't let it. He needed to understand it, to quantify it. The part of him that was a meticulous analyst, the part that had allowed a quirkless boy to believe he could be a hero, took over. He reached under his bed and pulled out a new notebook. It was cheap, plain, and solid black. He had bought it last week, driven by a nameless dread. He opened it to the first page. With a trembling hand, he wrote a title. It wasn't heroic. It was clinical. It was terrified. Case file, an OFA. Subject, Izukumidaria, ninth bearer of One for All. Initial observations. He began to list his symptoms, his handwriting neat and precise, a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. 1. Physical decay. Localized necrotic tissue damage following concentrated power usage. Skin becomes discolored, deep purple/black, bruised, and appears lifeless. Fades over time, but a faint discoloration remains. C. Left arm post-entrance exam, right index finger post-apprehension test. The black veins erupt from the source point of the regulator artifact upon high-yield power usage. Appear to be conduits of corruptive energy. Recede after use, but leave behind the necrotic tissue. 2. Mental/psychic intrusion. Auditory hallucinations/intrusive thoughts, the whispers. Occur during attempts to channel power. Content is consistently derogatory, aimed at undermining confidence and resolve. Phrases noted: you're not worthy, pathetic failure, he knows what you are. The intensity appears proportional to the amount of power being channeled. Psychic pain, distinct from physical pain. Manifests as a sharp, localized sensation in the cranium, e.g., ice pick behind the eye. Seems to be a direct punitive response for resisting the whispers or attempting fine control of the quirk. 3. Sensory distortion/hallucination. Observed once, post-peak exertion and psychic pain, apprehension test. Manifested as transient visual distortion, shadowy figure, and auditory distortion, cheers sounding like screams. Suggests the curse can affect perception of reality. Requires further monitoring. Is this a direct effect or a symptom of neurological damage? 4. Memory loss. Significant amnesia surrounding the single greatest power expenditure to date, 0-pointer takedown. A complete blank slate of the event itself, from the moment of the punch to the beginning of the fall, indicates a possible self-preservation mechanism of the mind, or a tithe taken by the curse in exchange for immense power. The most alarming symptom. He stared at the list, at his own neat handwriting detailing the slow, systematic erosion of his body and mind. This was the price of his dream. It wasn't a one-time payment of broken bones. It was a tax, levied on his very soul with every use. He closed the black notebook and hid it again, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He was a student at UA, a hero in training, but he was also a specimen in a private, horrifying experiment, and the only subject of the study was himself. The whispers were quiet for now, but he knew they were there, waiting in the dark, hungry for his next moment of weakness. And in the world of heroes, those moments were guaranteed to come. The bus ride to the unforeseen simulation joint was, for everyone else, an exercise in youthful exuberance. The air was thick with chatter, a chaotic symphony of excited voices. As was bluntly questioning the similarity between his and All Might's quirks, Kirishima was admiring Bakugo's fiery personality, and Kaminari was trying, and failing, to flirt. It was normal. It was the sound of a class bonding, of teenagers on a field trip. For Izuku, it was like listening to a radio broadcast from another planet. He sat wedged between the window and a sleeping Mineta, a forced, tight smile plastered on his face. He nodded when spoken to, offered a few mumbled, non-committal answers, but his mind was elsewhere. It was caught in the cold, vicious loop of his secret. The headache was back, a low, persistent thrum behind his eyes that spiked whenever the bus hit a bump. His left wrist, covered by the sleeve of his costume, felt like it was encased in a block of ice. He kept flexing his right index finger, the one that had been broken and healed. The skin was still faintly discolored, a pale, bruised violet that hadn't quite faded. A permanent reminder. He'd started cataloging these marks in the black notebook, mapping the slow, insidious creep of the decay. A small patch on his finger. A larger, more faded one on his forearm. Scars of a war no one else knew he was fighting. The whispers had grown bolder in the days following the apprehension test. They no longer waited for him to try and use his power. They were opportunists. A moment of self-doubt during a lecture, a flash of fear when Aizawa's gaze lingered on him for a moment too long, that was all it took. A faint, insidious thought would slither in. They're all so much better than you. Aizawa is watching. He knows you're a fraud. That Uraraka girl is only nice to you out of pity. He was becoming an expert at ignoring them, at building mental walls. But it was exhausting. It was a constant, low-level siege that left him perpetually on edge, his nerves frayed raw. The paranoia was the worst part. He found himself analyzing his classmates' every word, searching for hidden meanings, for the moment they would finally see the rot he felt was clinging to him, and cast him out. His interactions with Uraraka and Ida had become strained. They were trying so hard to be his friends, and he kept pushing them away with curt answers and a general air of distraction, unable to explain the real reason he couldn't relax, couldn't just be with them. When they arrived at the USJ, the sheer scale of the facility was enough to momentarily silence even his inner demons. The dome was massive, a self-contained world. The space hero, 13, was there to greet them, their astronaut-like costume a friendly, welcoming sight. They explained the purpose of the facility, to train them to use their quirks for rescue in various disaster scenarios. The landslide zone, the mountain zone, the conflagration zone. It was incredible. So, Aizawa began, his voice cutting through the students all. First things first, he never got to finish his sentence. The lights in the facility flickered and died, plunging them into a dim, eerie twilight. The central fountain sputtered and went still. A cold, unnatural silence fell over the massive dome. Then, at the heart of the plaza below, the air seemed to twist. A small, black pinprick appeared, swirling like smoke. It rapidly expanded, a vortex of dark purple energy that crackled with a malevolent power. Izuku's blood ran cold. This wasn't part of the simulation. From the heart of the swirling void, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them. Hundreds. A tide of miscreants, thugs, and villains, their faces contorted in ugly sneers and crazed grins. They poured out into the plaza, a chaotic army of malice. 3 figures stood at the forefront. One was the warp gate itself, a being of mist with glowing yellow eyes. Another was a lanky, pale man covered in disembodied hands, his posture scratchy and erratic. And beside him was a monster, a hulking beast of pure, dark muscle, its brain exposed, its eyes vacant and staring, its mouth locked in a permanent, bird-like beak. "Stay together and don't move!" Aizawa ordered, his voice sharp as he pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. 13, protect the students. What's going on? Kirishima asked, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. Is this part of the training too? No, Aizawa said, his capture weapon already beginning to writhe. Those are real villains. The words hung in the air, a death knell to their field trip. This was real. The danger was real. The potential for death was real. As Aizawa leaped down into the fray, a one-man army against a horde, Izuku's mind went into overdrive. His analyst's brain took over, a desperate defense mechanism against the rising tide of panic. Warp quirk is the key. They can't retreat or call for reinforcements if he's taken out. Aizawa-sensei is an underground hero, skilled in fighting large groups. He's buying time. We need to get back to the bus. Call for help. But the warp villain, Kurogyri, anticipated their escape. In a swirl of purple mist, he appeared before them, blocking their path. I won't allow that. The villain's disembodied voice echoed. We are the League of Villains. We were told All Might would be here. We came to kill the symbol of peace, kill All Might. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The thought of his mentor, his hero, his father figure, being the target of this horrific assault, a cold, protective fury began to burn through his fear. Before anyone could react, Bakugo and Kirishima charged forward, lashing out at the misty form of the villain. Their attacks were useless, passing right through him. In the next instant, the world dissolved into a swirling purple vortex. Kurogyri's mist enveloped them. My job, the villain declared, is to scatter you all, and torture you to death. Izuku felt a disorienting lurch, a feeling of being pulled apart and reassembled. He squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, he was no longer on the entrance platform. He was in the water, sputtering and flailing, the surface of the shipwreck zone churning around him. The first villain lunged at him from below, a man with a shark-like quirk, his mouth open wide to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Instinct took over. There was no time for finesse, no time for control. He drew back his arm underwater, reached for one for all, and flicked his finger. Smash! The power erupted, not as a focus beam, but as a concussive blast of pure force. It turned the water in front of him into a cannonball, blasting the shark villain away and churning the entire shipwreck zone into a miniature maelstrom. The pain came an instant later. The icy spike from the bracer was vicious, a punishment for his crude use of power. His finger, the one he'd broken just days ago, screamed in protest. But it was the whisper that almost made him sink. Useless. Wasting power. You'll kill yourself before you save anyone. He grit his teeth, kicking his way to the surface. Ajri's long tongue shot out and wrapped around his waist, pulling him onto the deck of the ship where she and Mineta were huddled. Midoriya, are you okay? She asked, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Mineta's hysterical sobbing. I'm fine, he lied, clutching his throbbing finger. He looked around. The ship was surrounded by villains, their quirks all water-based. They were trapped. We're all gonna die! Mineta wailed, pulling the purple balls from his head and throwing them uselessly into the water. No, we're not, Izuku said, his mind racing, trying to outrun the whispers. He watched one of Mineta's sticky balls float on the surface. An idea sparked. A reckless, insane idea. Ajri, Mineta, what are your quirks? Exactly? He listened, his analyst's brain piecing together a plan. Ajri's frog abilities. Mineta's super sticky, yet personally non-adherent spheres. His own overwhelming, self-destructive power. There was a path to victory here. A narrow, dangerous one. Okay, he said, looking down at his hand, at the vast, terrible power it contained. I have a plan. But it's going to hurt, he explained it quickly. Mineta would throw his spheres into the water. Izuku would create a vortex, pulling all the villains and the spheres into a single point. Ajri would then grab them both and leap to safety. A vortex? How? Ajri asked, her large eyes blinking. Izuku looked at his throbbing finger. Like this, he said grimly. He stood at the edge of the ship, took a deep breath, and plunged his hand into the water. He didn't try to control it this time. He didn't try to be precise. He just opened the floodgates. Delaware. Smash! He flicked his middle finger, pouring a massive, uncontrolled burst of one for all into the water. The result was catastrophic. It was like detonating a depth charge. The water beneath him erupted, forming a massive, swirling whirlpool. The ship groaned and tilted, and every villain in the zone was caught in the powerful current, sucked helplessly towards the center, where Mineta's sticky spheres were now clumping together into a giant, inescapable trap. The cost was immediate and agonizing. The bracer on his left wrist flared with a dull crimson light, a vampire feeding on his power. The cold was so intense it felt like his entire arm had been submerged in liquid nitrogen. The black veins, darker and more defined this time, erupted from the regulator, crawling over his skin like spiders, reaching his elbow in a heartbeat. And his mind broke. The whispers were a deafening roar. The psychic pain was a sledgehammer to his skull. But this time, something new happened. A vivid, terrifyingly real hallucination superimposed itself over reality. The swirling water of the whirlpool turned a thick, syrupy black. The terrified faces of the villains twisted into monstrous masks of agony, and rising from the center of the vortex, for a single, horrifying second, was a face. A woman with dark hair and a small mole under her lip. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it felt like it was being branded onto his soul. She was screaming, a silent, spectral scream of pure torment. Nana Shimura. The name appeared in his mind, a piece of knowledge he shouldn't have had. The face vanished, leaving him gasping, his vision swimming. The world tilted on its axis. He stumbled back, clutching his head, a cry of pure agony tearing from his throat. Midoriya! Azuri's tongue wrapped around him again, yanking him away from the edge just as she grabbed Mineta. She launched them through the air, away from the shipwreck and towards the central plaza, landing gracefully near the edge of the water. Izuku collapsed to the ground, his body trembling uncontrollably. His left arm was a ruin of pain, the skin from his wrist to his elbow a mottled, ugly blackish purple. His head felt like it was about to split open. The image of the screaming woman was burned into the back of his eyelids. He had won. He had saved them. But a piece of him had just been carved out and thrown into the abyss. The memory loss from the entrance exam now seemed like a mercy. This was so much worse. This was being forced to witness the damnation of his predecessors. He looked up, his vision slowly clearing, and saw a sight that banished all thoughts of his own pain. In the center of the plaza, Aizawa was down. Their teacher, who had been so effortlessly dispatching dozens of villains, was pinned beneath the hulking, monstrous Noma. The man covered in hands, Shigaraki, was cackling, his fingers reaching for Aizawa's face. "You're so cool, Eraserhead," Shigaraki rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "But he's going to be the one to kill you!" The Noma let out a guttural roar and slammed Aizawa's head into the concrete. A sickening crunch echoed across the plaza. Time stopped. Izuku saw red. All the pain, all the fear, all the psychic torment from the curse, it all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of pure, protective fury. That was his teacher. His hero. He was on his feet before he even realized it, running towards the center of the plaza. He heard Azuri call his name, but her voice was a distant echo. The only thing that existed was the monster, the villain, and his fallen teacher. He was fast. Years of obsessive training, combined with the raw power of one for all thrumming in his veins, made him a green blur. He reached the scene just as Shigaraki's hand was about to touch Azuri, who had been trying to help. "Get away from her!" Izuku roared. He drew back his fist, his right arm this time, and poured every ounce of his being into it. He didn't think about the consequences. He didn't think about the pain or the whispers or the broken bones. He just thought about saving them. Smash! He didn't aim for Shigaraki. He aimed for the space right next to him. The punch connected with the air, but the force it displaced was monumental. A hurricane erupted from his fist, a shockwave so powerful it tore up the ground and sent Shigaraki and the Noma tumbling backward, away from Aizawa and Azuri. The sheer pressure of the wind was a physical wall, but the recoil was absolute. His entire right arm shattered. Bones turned to dust, muscle to pulp. But that was the least of it. The bracer on his other arm flared with a light so bright it was like a dying star. The black veins didn't just spread, they exploded outwards, engulfing his entire left arm, crawling across his shoulder, over his chest, and up his neck. The pain was a full-body conflagration, a feeling of being torn apart on a molecular level. His mind didn't just fracture. It shattered. The screaming chorus of voices returned, a tidal wave of despair. and through it he saw them. Not just Nana Shimura. He saw fleeting, distorted images of the other vestiges. A man with black hair and determined eyes, his face a mask of agony. A bald, powerfully built man, roaring in defiance and pain. A man with a scarf, his expression one of grim resignation. 6 ghosts, 6 predecessors, all trapped in their own personal hell, their torment feeding the curse he now bore. He was feeling their echoes, their final, desperate moments. He collapsed to his knees, his broken right arm hanging uselessly, his left side consumed by the creeping black decay. He was screaming, but no sound was coming out. He was drowning in a sea of inherited agony. Through the haze of his torment, he saw the Noma stand up, completely unfazed by the blast. He saw it rush towards him, a dark mountain of muscle ready to obliterate him. This was it. He had spent his power, broken his body, and shattered his mind, all for nothing. Boom! The doors to the USJ burst open. And standing there, silhouetted against the light, was a figure. He was not smiling. His face was a mask of thunderous, apocalyptic rage. "It's fine now," All Might said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that promised retribution. "I am here." The fight that followed was the stuff of legends. It was a clash of titans, a battle that defied the very laws of physics. All Might versus the Noma. Power against power. Shock absorption versus brute force. Izuku watched, helpless, from the sidelines where Azuri and Mineta had dragged him. Every punch All Might threw, every blow he took, echoed within Izuku. He could feel the strain on his mentor's body through the phantom connection of One for All. He could see the steam rising from All Might's form, a sign his time limit was dangerously close. The Noma was a nightmare. It was designed for one purpose, to kill All Might. It had multiple quirks, hyperregeneration, and that horrifying shock absorption. It was a living, breathing counter to the symbol of peace. All Might was being pushed back. He was trapped, the Noma's claws digging into his old wound, the source of his time limit. He was bleeding. He was weakening. Izuku saw it in the eyes of his classmates. Kirishima, Bakugo, and Todoroki had arrived, creating a crucial distraction, but it wasn't enough. He saw the dawning horror on their faces as they realized the impossible. All might actually lose. No, no. The word was a bedrock in the swirling chaos of Izuku's mind. He would not let it happen. He couldn't fight. His arms were useless, his body a wreck. The black decay had receded slightly, but his left side was numb and cold, the skin a horrifying mosaic of black and purple bruises. But he could think. He could analyze. Shock absorption, not nullification, he thought, the idea cutting through the pain. There has to be a limit. A threshold. He can't absorb an infinite amount of force. He has to overwhelm it. More than 100%. He had to tell him. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain and the wave of dizziness. "All Might!" he screamed, his voice raw and broken. "Its shock absorption has a limit. You have to go beyond. You can beat it." All Might heard him. Their eyes met across the battlefield. In that gaze, a silent understanding passed. Acknowledgement. Gratitude. And a promise. "You're right, young Midoriya!" All Might roared, a fresh wave of determination surging through him. "A real hero will always find a way to break out of a pinch." He began to punch. Not single, powerful blows, but a rapid, unending barrage of strikes, each one faster and stronger than the last. 100% of his power, again and again and again. "You may have heard these words before," he bellowed, his fists a blur. "But I'll teach you what they really mean. Go beyond. Plus Ultra." The final punch was not just a punch. It was a statement. It was the culmination of a legacy, the concentrated will of 8 generations of heroes. It sent the Noma flying out of the dome and into the stratosphere, a new, man-made star in the morning sky. The silence that followed was absolute. All Might stood, victorious, but enveloped in a massive cloud of steam, his body trembling on the verge of collapse. The secret was about to be revealed. Izuku knew what he had to do. He stumbled forward, calling out to Kirishima. "We have to form a wall. A human shield. No one can see him like this, but it was too late. The remaining villains, Shigaraki and Kurojairi, were still there. Shigaraki was scratching his neck furiously, his plan in tatters. You cheated, he hissed, his voice trembling with psychotic rage. He was about to lunge, a final, desperate attack. Bang! 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 Gunshots echoed through the dome. Shigaraki cried out as bullets tore through his arms and legs. The pro-heroes had arrived. Snipe, Present Mike, Nizu, the Yui staff was here, and they were ready for war. Shigaraki and Kurojairi made their escape, but not before Shigaraki locked eyes with Izuku one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. The battle was over. In the aftermath, as paramedics swarmed the scene, Izuku finally allowed himself to collapse. The adrenaline faded, and the full, horrifying weight of his condition crashed down on him. His right arm was broken beyond recognition. His left arm and torso were a canvas of necrotic-looking bruises, a map of the curse's path. His head felt like it was full of broken glass. All Might, having been shielded by Cementos, found him. He knelt down, his skeletal form looking impossibly frail and weary. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his expression a mask of profound guilt and sorrow. Young Midoriya! Izuku! He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. He had seen it. He had seen the black veins, the unnatural light from the bracer, the pure agony on his successor's face. He had seen the true nature of the kickback he had so carelessly downplayed. This wasn't a manageable strain. This was a soul-eating curse. It's okay. All Might. Izuku managed to whisper, a tear leaking from the corner of his eye. We won. He tried to smile, but the expression turned into a grimace of pain as another wave of psychic agony washed over him. He closed his eyes, and the screaming face of Nana Shimura flashed in his mind again, a permanent ghost in his machine. He had survived. He had helped save the day. He was a hero. But as the paramedics carefully loaded him onto a stretcher, he knew with a chilling certainty that a fundamental part of him had died today in the USJ, sacrificed on the altar of his dream. The secret he was festering was no longer just a set of symptoms in a notebook. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was getting stronger every time he answered the call to be a hero. And it was hungry for more.